I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Susan Kensington standing on my front porch at 7 in the morning, clipboard clutched against her puffy winter coat like a shield. The woman had that look on her face, the one that said she was about to make my Tuesday infinitely worse than it needed to be. "Gerald Owens," she said, pronouncing my full name like I was a defendant in court. "I need to speak with you about a serious HOA violation." I stood there in my doorway, coffee mug in hand, watching my breath fog up in the frigid February air. The weather forecast had been screaming about the incoming blizzard for 3 days straight. Every news channel in Boulder, Colorado, was warning people to stock up on supplies and stay indoors. And here was Susan, HOA president and professional pain in everyone's backside, worried about violations. "Susan, it's freezing. What could possibly be so urgent?" She pointed a manicured finger toward my driveway. "That extension cord running from your garage to your car. It's unsightly and against HOA regulations, Section 12, Subsection 4. All exterior electrical connections must be concealed or removed within 24 hours of installation." I looked at the orange extension cord snaking across my driveway, plugged into my block heater to keep my engine from freezing solid. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees overnight, with wind chill making it feel closer to 0. "Susan, there's a blizzard coming. I need that cord to keep my engine warm so I can actually drive if there's an emergency. Rules are rules, Gerald. I'm giving you until noon to remove it or I'll be forced to issue a fine." She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "That's 5 hours, plenty of time to comply." I wanted to argue, to tell her exactly where she could stick her clipboard, but I'd learned over the past 2 years of living in Maplewood Heights that arguing with Susan Kensington was like arguing with a brick wall. Except the brick wall was less stubborn and had more empathy. "Fine," I said, shutting the door before she could lecture me further. I watched through my front window as she marched back to her house 3 doors down, her boots crunching through the thin layer of snow that had already started accumulating. Susan's house was the largest in our development, a sprawling 2-story colonial with white pillars, and a perfectly manicured lawn that she measured with a ruler to ensure the grass never exceeded HOA-approved height. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who lived directly next door. "Saw the dragon lady at your door." "What now?" "Extension cord drama," I typed back. "She wants it removed by noon." "Of course she does. Stay warm, man. This storm is going to be brutal." Marcus wasn't exaggerating. By 9 in the morning, the snow was coming down in thick sheets, and the wind had picked up enough to create whiteout conditions. I unplugged my extension cord and coiled it up, storing it in the garage while cursing Susan's name under my breath. My truck would be fine for a few hours, I told myself. The storm would blow through and everything would go back to normal. I should have known better. By 11, the power started flickering. I was in my kitchen making lunch when the lights dimmed, brightened, then went out completely. The sudden silence was eerie. No hum of the refrigerator, no background noise from the heating system, nothing but the howl of wind outside. I grabbed my phone and checked the local utility company's outage map. Half of Boulder was dark, including our entire neighborhood. The estimated restoration time kept updating, pushing further and further into the evening. "Great," I muttered, opening my pantry to take inventory of supplies. I had enough canned food to last a few days, plenty of water, and a camping stove with fuel. My fireplace worked, and I had a cord of wood stacked in the garage. I'd be uncomfortable, but I'd survive. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "You lose power too?" he asked. "Yeah, just now. You okay over there?" "We're good. Jennifer made sure we were stocked up." Listen, if you need anything, we've got a generator running. Can't power the whole house, but enough to keep the fridge and a few lights on. Thanks, man. I should be fine. Got the fireplace going. Stay safe. I'm hearing this storm might last through tomorrow. I hung up and started building a fire, crumpling newspaper and arranging kindling the way my dad had taught me years ago. Within minutes, I had flames crackling and warmth spreading through the living room. I dragged my sleeping bag downstairs and set up camp on the couch, close to the heat source. The afternoon crept by slowly. I read a book by firelight, checked my phone periodically for updates, and watched the snow pile up against my windows. By 3 o'clock, there had to be at least 8 inches on the ground with no sign of letting up. That's when I heard the screaming. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. Someone was yelling outside. I went to my front window and peered through the curtain of white. Susan Kensington was standing in her driveway, arms waving frantically. I pulled on my boots and coat and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a physical blow, and I immediately understood why the Weather Service had issued a blizzard warning. Visibility was maybe 20 feet, and the wind was strong enough to make walking difficult. Susan. I called out, trudging toward her property. She whirled around, and I could see genuine panic on her face. Gerald, thank God, I need help. This was new. Susan Kensington never asked for help. She demanded compliance, issued fines, and sent threatening letters on HOA letterhead, but she never asked for help. What's wrong? My heat is out. The power's gone and I don't have a fireplace. My house is already getting cold and I have my mother staying with me. She's 83 and has respiratory issues. She can't handle this temperature. I stood there for a moment, processing. Part of me wanted to tell her that rules were rules, that maybe she should have prepared better for the storm everyone knew was coming. But I'm not that kind of person, and regardless of how much Susan annoyed me, I wasn't going to let an elderly woman freeze. Come to my place. I have a fireplace. You and your mother can stay warm until the power comes back. Relief flooded her features. Oh, thank you, Gerald. Let me get her. We'll be right over. She disappeared into her house, and I hurried back to mine, adding more wood to the fire and clearing space in the living room. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. Susan stood there with a tiny, frail woman bundled in blankets. "This is my mother, Dorothy," Susan said, helping the elderly woman inside. "Pleased to meet you, dear," Dorothy said, her voice weak but kind. "I'm so sorry for the trouble." "No trouble at all," I said, guiding her to the couch closest to the fireplace. "Let me get you both some hot tea." I used my camping stove to boil water and made 3 mugs of tea. Dorothy wrapped her hands around the cup gratefully, and even Susan seemed to relax a little as warmth seeped back into her bones. "I really do appreciate this," Susan said quietly. "I know we haven't always seen eye to eye." "Don't worry about it," I replied, stoking the fire. "Nobody should be out in this weather without heat." We sat in awkward silence for a while, listening to the wind howl and the fire crackle. Dorothy dozed off, snoring softly under a pile of blankets. Susan checked her phone obsessively, refreshing the power company's website every few minutes. "Still nothing?" I asked. "They're saying it could be 12 to 18 hours now." "Trees are down all over the county and crews can't even get to most of the problem areas because of the road conditions." I nodded. "We'll manage. I have plenty of food and wood." "About your extension cord," Susan started, and I held up a hand. "Can we not do this right now?" "No, I mean." I wanted to apologize. "You were right. It was necessary, and I was being petty." She looked down at her hands. "I get so caught up in the rules sometimes that I forget why we have them in the first place. They're supposed to make the neighborhood better, not make people's lives harder." I wasn't sure how to respond. In 2 years of dealing with Susan's tyrannical HOA presidency, I'd never heard her admit she was wrong about anything. "Thanks," I said finally. "I appreciate that." The afternoon melted into evening. I made dinner on the camping stove, heating up canned soup and sharing crackers. Dorothy woke up and chatted pleasantly about her life, telling stories about raising Susan as a single mother in Denver. Susan even smiled a few times, though she still checked her phone constantly. Around 8 o'clock, there was a loud bang from outside, followed by a flash of light that briefly illuminated the swirling snow. "What was that?" Susan asked, jumping to her feet. I went to the window but couldn't see much through the blizzard. "Sounded like a transformer blowing." "Probably means the power's going to be out even longer." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "You see that? Transformer on Maple Street just exploded. Utility company says they can't even assess the damage until morning." I showed the message to Susan, whose face fell. "Morning. We're going to be without power all night. Looks that way, but we're safe here. We'll be fine." Susan sank back into her chair, shoulders slumped. "I need to check on my house. I have some things I should grab if we're staying here overnight." "Susan, you can't go out there. It's a whiteout." "I'll be quick. I just need to get some medication for my mother and a change of clothes. Please, Gerald, I'll be right back." Against my better judgment, I nodded. "5 minutes. If you're not back in 5 minutes, I'm coming after you." She bundled up and disappeared into the storm. I watched the clock, anxiety building in my chest. 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. At 7 minutes I was pulling on my boots when Susan burst through the door, snow-covered and breathing hard. "Someone stole it," she gasped. "Stole what?" "Your extension cord. I saw it in your garage when the door was open earlier. I thought maybe I could borrow it. My mother's medication needs to be refrigerated and I could run it to Marcus's generator. But when I went to your garage, it was gone. The side door was open and the extension cord was missing." I stared at her. "You went into my garage." "I know, I'm sorry, I should have asked. But I was desperate and you were inside with my mother and I just thought." "Susan, calm down. Let me check." I walked through my kitchen to the garage and flipped the light switch out of habit before remembering there was no power. Using my phone's flashlight, I scanned the space. The side door was indeed open, snow drifting in through the gap, and the spot where I'd hung my extension cord was empty. Who would steal an extension cord in the middle of a blizzard? I wondered aloud. But even as I said it, I realized the answer. Someone desperate for power. Someone who needed it badly enough to break into a neighbor's garage during a storm. Susan appeared behind me. "I'm so sorry, Gerald. This is my fault. If I hadn't made you take it down, not your fault. Someone made a choice to steal. Let's just figure out who and why." I closed and locked the side door, making a mental note to check the latch mechanism once the storm passed. Back inside, I explained the situation to Dorothy, who looked concerned but remained calm. "Could it have been kids?" she suggested. "In this weather, doubtful," I replied. "Any parent with sense would have their kids locked inside right now." My phone rang. It was Marcus again. "Hey, weird question," he said. "Did you loan your extension cord to anyone?" "No, why?" "Because I just saw someone running past my house with an orange extension cord, heading toward the other end of the development. Couldn't see who it was through the snow, but they were in a hurry." "Someone stole mine from my garage. Which direction were they heading?" "Toward the Hendersons' place, I think." "Maybe Deborah Patterson's house." Deborah Patterson. The name clicked in my mind. She was relatively new to the neighborhood, having moved in about 6 months ago. Single, kept to herself, always seemed a bit on edge at HOA meetings. And her house was at the far end of the development, one of the smallest models with, if I remembered correctly, electric heat only. "Thanks, Marcus. I'm going to check it out. Dude, are you crazy? It's a blizzard out there. Someone stole from me. I want my extension cord back. I hung up before he could argue further and started pulling on my winter gear. Susan watched me with wide eyes. You're really going out there? It's my property. And if someone's desperate enough to steal an extension cord, they might be in real trouble. I need to make sure they're okay, even if I am angry about the theft. I'm coming with you. No, you need to stay with your mother. My mother is fine. She's warm and safe. And this is partly my responsibility. If I hadn't been so rigid about the rules, Susan, I'm coming, Gerald. Don't argue. There was a steel in her voice that reminded me why she'd been HOA president for 6 years running. When Susan Kensington made up her mind about something, that was the end of the discussion. We stepped out into the blizzard together, leaning into the wind as we made our way down the snow-covered street. Visibility was terrible, and more than once I lost sight of Susan despite her being only a few feet away. We passed Marcus's house, where warm light glowed from a window, and continued toward the end of the development. Deborah Patterson's house was dark, like all the others, but as we got closer I noticed something strange. A faint orange line ran from her garage, across her yard, and disappeared around the side of her house. That's your extension cord, Susan said, pointing. We followed the cord to its destination. It ran through a basement window and into Deborah's house. I knocked on the front door, hard enough to be heard over the wind. No answer. I knocked again. Deborah, it's Gerald Owens from down the street. I need to talk to you. Still nothing. Susan tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. She pushed it open and called out, Deborah, are you all right? We're not here to cause trouble. We just want to make sure you're safe. We stepped inside, snow falling from our coats. The house was freezing, maybe 40 degrees at most. I could hear something running in the basement, a mechanical hum that seemed out of place in the otherwise silent house. Deborah, I called again, moving toward the basement stairs. Don't come down here. A voice floated up from below, panicked and defensive. I'll call the police. Deborah, it's Gerald and Susan from the HOA. We need to talk to you. You took my extension cord. A long pause. Then quietly, I'm sorry. I was desperate. My heat is out and I have tropical fish. They'll die if the water temperature drops too much. I have a space heater running on a battery generator, but I needed the extension cord to reach the tank from the generator. Susan and I exchanged glances. Of all the reasons I'd imagined for someone stealing my extension cord during a blizzard, tropical fish hadn't made the list. Can we come down? Susan asked, her voice surprisingly gentle. Another pause. Okay. We descended the stairs carefully. The basement was set up as a combination living space and aquarium room. Against one wall stood a massive tank, easily 200 gallons, filled with colorful fish darting between coral and plants. Next to it sat a portable battery generator about the size of a suitcase, and plugged into it was a space heater pointing directly at the tank. My orange extension cord connected the generator to the heater. Deborah stood in the corner, arms wrapped around herself. She was maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and eyes red from crying. I'm so sorry, she said again. I know it was wrong, I couldn't think of what else to do. These fish, they're all I have. My ex-husband got everything else in the divorce. The house, most of our savings, even our dog. The judge said I could keep the fish tank because he didn't want it. So I moved here, started over, and these stupid fish became the only thing that made me feel like life was worth living. I know that sounds pathetic. It doesn't, Susan interrupted. It doesn't sound pathetic at all. I walked over to examine the setup. The space heater was one of those small ceramic models, probably pulling about 1,500 watts. The battery generator looked like a high-end model, But even so, it wouldn't last more than a few hours running a space heater at full blast. "Deborah, this generator isn't going to last much longer," I said gently. "And the extension cord isn't helping anything. You're just using it to position the heater." "I know," she whispered. "I'm trying to make it last until the power comes back. I keep turning it on and off, letting the room warm up and then cooling down again. But the fish need the water at 78 degrees minimum. If it drops below that for too long, they'll die." I looked at the tank thermometer. It reads 76 degrees and dropping. "How long has the power been out here?" Susan asked. "Since 10 this morning. An hour before the rest of the neighborhood. Something about being at the end of the line." I did the math in my head. Her house had been without power for over 10 hours. Even with the generator and space heater, she was fighting a losing battle. "We need to move the tank," I said suddenly. Both women looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "It's at least 200 gallons, Deborah said. "That's over 1,500 pounds of water plus the weight of the tank itself. We can't move it. Not the whole tank. The fish. We move the fish to my house, keep them warm by the fireplace. Once the power comes back, we move them back." "How?" Deborah asked. "I don't have anything to transport them in." I thought for a moment. "Buckets, coolers, anything that holds water. We fill them, put the fish in, carry them to my house. It's only a few 100 feet. "In a blizzard," Susan pointed out. "You have a better idea." Silence. "I have 5-gallon buckets," Deborah said slowly, "and some coolers, if we're really doing this." "We're doing this," I said. "Let's move." The next hour was chaos. We filled every bucket and cooler we could find with tank water, carefully netting fish and transferring them to the containers. Deborah gave us a crash course in fish handling, explaining which species needed to be separated and which could travel together. She had everything from angelfish to clownfish to a small eel that she called Herbert. "Herbert needs his own bucket," she insisted. "He gets aggressive in close quarters." By the time we had all 23 fish divided among 8 containers, we were sweating despite the cold. Then came the hard part, getting them to my house. Susan and I made the first trip together, each carrying a 5-gallon bucket with a lid hastily secured by duct tape. The wind had picked up even more, and the snow was now over a foot deep in places. We struggled through drifts, moving slowly to avoid sloshing water and stressing the fish. When we finally reached my house, Dorothy met us at the door with towels and concerned questions. We set the buckets near the fireplace, checked to make sure the fish had survived the journey, and then headed back out. 4 more trips. Each one harder than the last as the storm intensified and fatigue set in. My arms ached from carrying heavy buckets, and my face was numb from the cold. But every time I wanted to stop, I thought about Deborah standing in her frozen basement, crying over tropical fish, and I kept going. On the final trip, I carried Herbert the eel while Susan helped Deborah grab some personal items. The eel's bucket was surprisingly heavy, and halfway to my house, I slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. I went down hard, landing on my back with the bucket clutched to my chest like a football. For a horrible moment, I lay there in the snow, wind howling around me, wondering if I just killed Herbert the eel. Then the bucket shifted, and I felt movement inside, still alive. I struggled to my feet and continued the journey, moving even more carefully now. By the time I reached my door, I was shaking from cold and exhaustion. Inside, my living room had transformed into an emergency aquarium. Buckets and coolers lined the walls, all positioned to benefit from the fireplace's heat. Dorothy had taken it upon herself to monitor the water temperatures, using a meat thermometer she'd found in my kitchen. 74 degrees in this one, she reported, pointing to a bucket of angelfish. 75 in that one. The coolers are holding heat better. Deborah and Susan arrived moments after me, and we all collapsed in exhausted heaps around the fireplace. For several minutes, nobody spoke. We just sat there, warming up and catching our breath. "I can't believe we just did that," Deborah finally said. "I can't believe you stole my extension cord to run a space heater for fish," I replied, but there was no anger in my voice. She had the grace to look ashamed. "I'll pay for it. Whatever you want." "I know I broke the law, you did," Susan interjected. "Breaking and entering, theft of property. Technically, Gerald could press charges." Deborah's face went pale. "But he's not going to," Susan continued, looking at me. "Are you Gerald?" I sighed. "No." "But Deborah, you can't do things like that. You should have asked for help. Someone would have helped you." "I didn't think anyone would care about fish," she said quietly. "Everyone always thinks it's stupid. They're just fish, you know, but to me they're important," Dorothy finished gently. "They're important to you, dear, and that makes them important to us." We spent the rest of the evening managing our makeshift aquarium. I kept the fire burning hot, and Dorothy monitored temperatures while Deborah checked on each fish individually, looking for signs of stress. Susan, surprisingly, turned out to be helpful, asking questions about the different species and taking notes on her phone about their care requirements. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with an update from the power company. Restoration efforts were delayed until morning due to dangerous conditions. We were looking at another 12 hours minimum without electricity. "Everyone should get some sleep," I suggested. "We'll take turns keeping the fire going and watching the fish." We worked out a schedule, 2-hour shifts with one person tending the fire and another monitoring the buckets. I took the first shift with Deborah, who refused to sleep until she was sure all her fish were stable. "Thank you," she said as we sat together in the firelight. "For not calling the cops, for helping with the fish, for everything." "We're neighbors," I replied. "This is what neighbors do." "Not in my experience." I added another log to the fire. "Then you've had bad neighbors." She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all night. "Tell me about this place. I've only been here 6 months and I barely know anyone. Susan always seemed so scary at the HOA meetings." "Susan's okay," I said, surprising myself. "She takes the rules seriously, sometimes too seriously, but her heart's in the right place." As if summoned by her name, Susan appeared from the kitchen with mugs of hot tea. "Couldn't sleep," she explained. "Thought you might want this." We sipped our tea and talked quietly, careful not to wake Dorothy. Deborah told us about her divorce, about leaving Seattle and moving to Colorado for a fresh start. Susan talked about inheriting her position as HOA president when the previous president moved away, and how she sometimes felt trapped by the responsibility. "Everyone expects me to enforce every rule perfectly," she admitted. "If I let one thing slide, suddenly I'm playing favorites. If I crack down on everything, I'm a tyrant. I can't win." "Maybe the answer isn't trying to win," I suggested. "Maybe it's about remembering that we're all just people trying to get by. Sometimes the rules need to bend a little." Susan considered this, staring into the fire. "Like extension cords during blizzards." "Exactly," Deborah laughed. "I can't believe this whole thing started because of an extension cord." "Hey, that's a 50-foot outdoor rated 12-gauge extension cord," I protested. "Those aren't cheap. I really will pay you back for it." "It's in your basement, connected to a generator that's probably dead by now. We'll get it later." My shift ended at 2 in the morning, and Marcus took over. He'd texted earlier offering to help, and I'd gratefully accepted. He brought fresh wood from his own supply and a thermos of coffee. "This is insane," he said, looking at all the buckets of fish. "You guys are insane, but in a good way." I went upstairs to my bedroom, which was freezing compared to the living room, and buried myself under 3 blankets. Despite my exhaustion, sleep came slowly. I kept thinking about Deborah stealing my extension cord, about Susan admitting she was wrong, about all of us working together to save tropical fish in the middle of a blizzard. I woke to weak sunlight filtering through my bedroom window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a confused moment, I wondered how we had coffee with no power, then remembered Marcus's generator. I pulled on fresh clothes and headed downstairs. The living room was a mess of sleeping bags, blankets, and fish buckets, but everyone was alive and moving. Dorothy was awake and chatting with Marcus about his job as a software engineer. Susan was checking the power company's website again, and Deborah was going bucket to bucket, counting fish and checking temperatures. All accounted for, she reported, relief evident in her voice. Everyone made it through the night. Temperatures holding steady at 76 degrees, Dorothy added. These coolers really do work better than the buckets. I poured myself coffee and checked my phone. The storm had finally passed overnight, leaving behind nearly 18 inches of snow and scattered power outages across the entire county. Our neighborhood was still dark, but crews were working to restore service. "They're saying maybe by this afternoon," Susan announced, looking up from her phone. As if on cue, there was a loud rumble from outside. Through the window, I could see a utility truck making its way slowly down our snow-covered street. "That's them," Marcus said. "About time." We watched as the crew stopped near the blown transformer, workers in orange vests setting up equipment and talking into radios. It was a slow process, made slower by the snow and cold, but they worked steadily through the morning. Around 11, someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a utility worker standing there, clipboard in hand. "You're Gerald Owens?" he asked. "That's me. We're getting ready to restore power to this section of the grid. I need to ask you some questions about power usage in the area." The transformer that blew last night was overloaded before the storm even hit. We're trying to figure out what caused it. Susan appeared beside me. "Overloaded how?" The worker consulted his clipboard. "Someone was pulling an excessive amount of power, more than what a normal household should use. It put strain on the transformer, and when the storm hit and everyone turned their heat up, it couldn't handle the load. Boom." "How much power are we talking about?" I asked. "Our meters show a sustained draw of about 3,500 watts from one location." "That's on top of normal household usage. Whatever it was running constantly for several days leading up to the failure." Deborah had gone very still. "What location?" she asked quietly. The worker checked his clipboard again. "Address shows 447 Maple Lane." That was Deborah's house. All eyes turned to her. She'd gone pale, her hand over her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. "The space heater." "What space heater?" the worker asked, his tone sharpening. "I have a space heater running in my basement for my fish tank. It's been running pretty much non-stop for the past week because my furnace isn't working right and the basement gets too cold and I needed to keep the water temperature stable." She trailed off, clearly realizing how bad this looked. The worker's expression hardened. "Madam, how large is this space heater?" "It's industrial size. I bought it online. 3,000 watts. I needed something powerful enough to heat the whole basement area." 3,000 watts running constantly for a week, plus your normal house load, plus everyone else's increased usage from the cold snap. The worker shook his head. "That's what blew the transformer. That's why the whole block lost power." Susan stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute." Deborah didn't know this would happen. It's not like she deliberately sabotaged the power grid. "Intent doesn't matter, madam. The fact is, Her excessive and improper use of electrical equipment caused damage to utility infrastructure and left dozens of homes without power during a dangerous storm. The utility company will be sending her a bill for the repairs, and there may be additional fines. How much? Deborah asked faintly. Replacing that transformer, parts and labor, you're looking at minimum $12,000. Plus the cost of the emergency response, overtime for the crews, potential liability for any damages suffered by other residents. He shrugged. Could be $20,000 or more. Deborah sat down hard on my couch, all color draining from her face. I don't have that kind of money. I barely have enough to cover my mortgage. The worker didn't look sympathetic. You'll need to work that out with the utility company. I'm just here to assess the damage and restore power. He turned to me. We should have your electricity back within the hour. In the meantime, please don't use any high-draw appliances when power is restored. The grid needs time to stabilize. He left, and we all stood there in stunned silence. $20,000, Deborah repeated, her voice hollow. I stole your extension cord to save my fish, and now I've blown up a transformer and owe $20,000. You didn't know, I said, but even I could hear how weak it sounded. Susan was pacing, her HOA president mind clearly working through something. The utility company is going to want their money. They'll probably sue if you can't pay. And if they find out you were running commercial-grade equipment in a residential setting, there might be code violations involved too. Susan, you're not helping, Marcus said sharply. I'm being realistic. This is serious. Deborah had her face in her hands. I'm going to lose everything. Again. The house, what's left of my savings, probably the fish too, because I won't be able to afford to keep them. She was crying now, shoulders shaking. Dorothy moved to sit beside her, putting a gentle arm around her shoulders. There now, dear, we'll figure something out. How? Deborah sobbed. How do we figure out a $20,000 mistake? I looked at Susan, who was still pacing. She caught my eye and stopped. What are you thinking? I asked her. I'm thinking about the HOA rules, she said slowly. Section 18, subsection 9, Emergency Relief Fund for residents facing hardship due to circumstances beyond their control. Deborah caused the circumstances, Marcus pointed out. Did she? Did she really? Susan's tone was sharp, defensive. She was trying to keep her pets alive with the tools she had available. She didn't know it would overload the transformer. It was an accident, a terrible accident, but it wasn't malicious. That's the definition of circumstances beyond control. The HOA has an emergency relief fund, I asked. In 2 years of living here, I'd never heard about it. Started 5 years ago when a hailstorm caused major damage to several roofs. We collect dues specifically for community emergencies. We have about $40,000 in the account right now. Hope flickered in Deborah's eyes. You're saying the HOA could pay for the transformer. I'm saying it's possible. I'd need to call an emergency meeting of the HOA board, present the case, and get a vote. But given that this affected everyone in the neighborhood and we're supposed to support our residents. She paused, looking directly at Deborah. I think I can make it happen. Why would you do that for me? Deborah asked. I stole from Gerald. I caused all this damage. Susan sat down across from her. Because this neighborhood is supposed to be a community. Because I spent 2 years enforcing rules without thinking about the people behind them. Because Gerald was right when he said sometimes the rules need to bend. She took a deep breath. And because if anyone understands making mistakes and needing help, it's me. The power came back on at noon, signaled by the sudden hum of appliances and the flicker of lights. A cheer went up in my living room, and we immediately started making plans to get Deborah's fish home. But first, Susan made phone calls. She contacted all 5 members of the HOA board, explained the situation, and scheduled an emergency video conference for that evening. I could hear her through my kitchen wall, making her case with a passion I'd never heard from her before. "She's one of us," Susan said into her phone. "We don't abandon our neighbors just because they made a mistake. That's not who we are. That's not who we're supposed to be." By 2 o'clock, we'd transported all the fish back to Deborah's basement. Her power was on, her furnace was running, and we'd helped her properly set up a more modest heating solution for the fish tank that wouldn't overload the electrical system. "No more industrial space heaters," I told her firmly. "If your furnace isn't working right, call someone to fix it. Don't jury-rig dangerous solutions." "I will, I promise." She looked around at all of us, her eyes welling up again. "I don't know how to thank you, any of you." "Start by coming to HOA meetings," Susan said, "and maybe not stealing extension cords anymore." Deborah actually laughed. "Deal." The HOA board meeting happened at 7 that evening. Susan had asked me to attend as a witness, so I sat in my office with my laptop, watching 4 faces appear on screen along with Susan's. She presented the situation clearly and professionally, outlining Deborah's circumstances, the transformer failure, and her proposal to use emergency funds to cover the repair costs. "This sets a precedent," one board member argued. "If we bail out someone who caused infrastructure damage, what's to stop others from being careless?" "The difference between carelessness and honest mistake," Susan replied. "Deborah Patterson didn't wake up one morning and decide to blow up a transformer. She was trying to care for her pets during a cold snap with the knowledge and resources she had available. She made a mistake, yes, but it wasn't malicious or negligent. It was human." Another board member spoke up. "I'm concerned about liability. If the HOA pays for this, are we accepting responsibility for what happened?" "We're accepting responsibility for taking care of our community," Susan countered. "That's literally what we exist to do. We collect dues to maintain common areas and support residents in times of crisis." "This is a crisis. One of our residents is facing financial ruin over an honest mistake. We have the means to help. The question is, do we have the will?" There was a long silence. Then one of the board members, an older man named Richard Thornton, cleared his throat. "I move that we approve the use of emergency relief funds to cover the transformer repair costs, up to a maximum of $25,000, with the understanding that Deborah Patterson will work with a licensed electrician to ensure her home's electrical system is safely configured going forward." "I second the motion," another board member said immediately. The vote was 4-1 in favor. Only the member who'd worried about precedent voted against it. Susan's face flooded with relief. "Thank you, all of you. I'll notify the utility company tomorrow and arrange payment." After the meeting ended, I walked down to Susan's house and knocked on her door. She answered with Dorothy hovering behind her. "You did a good thing tonight," I told Susan. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed her usually stern features. "We all did. This is what neighborhoods should be like, isn't it? People helping people, rules serving community instead of the other way around." "Does this mean I can keep my extension cord plugged in during cold snaps?" she laughed. "Within reason. Let's not go crazy." The next few days were busy. Susan coordinated with the utility company and arranged for the HOA to pay for the transformer repair. She also helped Deborah find an electrician who could properly assess her home's heating system and recommend safe solutions. The electrician found that Deborah's furnace had a faulty thermostat that was causing the basement to drop to unsafe temperatures. A $200 repair fixed the problem, eliminating her need for space heaters entirely. "I should have called someone months ago," Deborah admitted when I stopped by to check on her and the fish. I just kept thinking I could handle it myself, save money, some savings that turned out to be. Herbert the eel swam past in his tank, looking healthy and content. At least everyone's okay, I said. That's what matters. The story could have ended there with everyone safe and the community pulling together. But Susan Kensington wasn't quite finished transforming from HOA tyrant to reasonable human being. 2 weeks after the blizzard, she called another HOA meeting, this one open to all residents. I attended out of curiosity, as did about 30 other people from the neighborhood. Susan stood at the front of the community center, her infamous clipboard notably absent. I want to talk about the HOA rules, she began. Specifically, how we've been enforcing them. I've been president for 6 years, and in that time, I've focused on strict compliance with every regulation we have. I thought that's what made a good neighborhood. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rules exist to serve the community, not the other way around. They should make our lives better, safer, and more pleasant. But when rules become more important than people, when we lose sight of why we have them in the first place, they stop serving their purpose. She went on to propose a comprehensive review of all HOA regulations, with community input on which ones made sense and which ones needed to change. She suggested forming committees to handle different aspects of neighborhood life, spreading the responsibility around instead of concentrating it in one person. I don't want to be the clipboard-wielding dragon lady anymore, she said with a self-deprecating smile. I want to be part of a community that cares about each other, so I'm asking for your help to make that happen. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People volunteered for committees, offered suggestions, and even thanked Susan for her years of service. By the end of the meeting, the whole tone of the HOA had shifted from adversarial to collaborative. As people filed out, Deborah approached Susan and hugged her tightly. "Thank you," Deborah said, "for everything. I know I never really apologized properly for stealing Gerald's extension cord or causing all this trouble. You were desperate and scared," Susan interrupted. "We've all been there. The important thing is we got through it together." Marcus came over to join us, Jennifer at his side. "So, Gerald, you keeping that extension cord or what?" I laughed. "It's currently in my garage, properly coiled and ready for the next emergency, but I'm thinking about just keeping the block heater plugged in until spring." "Susan, that going to be a problem?" She pretended to consider it seriously. "Well, according to Section 12, subsection 4. She paused, then grinned. "You know what? I don't care. Keep it plugged in." We all laughed, the sound echoing through the community center. Spring came early that year. By mid-March, the snow had melted and the first green shoots were pushing through the soil. I was in my driveway washing my truck when Deborah walked over with a gift bag. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it." Inside was a brand new extension cord, 50 feet long, outdoor rated, 12 gauge. Exactly like the one she'd stolen. "Deborah, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. I stole your property. I'm replacing it. The other one is on loan until you don't need it anymore." She smiled. "Also, I wanted to invite you to something. I'm having a fish tank viewing party next weekend. Just a few neighbors, some snacks, a chance to appreciate the fish that caused all this chaos." "You interested?" "Absolutely. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself. And maybe Susan if she's free. She's been asking about the clownfish." The party was small but pleasant. Dorothy was there, charming everyone with stories about Susan's childhood. Marcus and Jennifer came, and to my surprise, Susan brought a date, a quiet man named Tom who worked at the library. We stood around Deborah's massive aquarium, watching Herbert the eel wind between rocks and the angelfish glide gracefully through the water. Hard to believe these little guys caused so much trouble, Marcus said. They didn't cause trouble, Susan corrected. We did, by not communicating, by not asking for help when we needed it, by not being the kind of community that looks out for each other. Well, we're that kind of community now, I said, raising my drink. To neighbors who become friends, to rules that make sense, and to tropical fish who survive blizzards. And to stolen extension cords, Deborah added with a laugh. We all clinked glasses, and I realized that Susan had been right. This was what a neighborhood should be. Not perfect, not always following every rule exactly, but real and human and caring. The rest of the spring and summer passed peacefully. Susan continued to lead the HOA, but with a much lighter touch. She focused on community events and improvements rather than violation enforcement. Under her new leadership, we organized block parties, neighborhood cleanups, and even a community garden. Deborah became an active member of the HOA, eventually joining the events committee. Her fish tank became something of a neighborhood attraction, with kids often stopping by after school to watch the inhabitants. As for me, I kept my extension cord plugged in through the rest of winter, and when I finally unplugged it in April, I carefully coiled it up and stored it in my garage, right next to the replacement Deborah had given me. Because you never know when you might need to help a neighbor in a blizzard, whether it's with heat, extension cords, or rescuing tropical fish from a basement. And in Maplewood Heights, we'd learned that being a good neighbor meant being ready for anything. The transformer that Deborah's space heater had destroyed got replaced with a larger, more robust model. The utility company, after receiving payment from the HOA, sent a technician to review electrical loads in the neighborhood and provide recommendations for safe usage. They even gave a presentation at one of our HOA meetings about preventing overload situations. The irony, Susan told me afterward, is that if Deborah had just come to one of us for help in the first place, none of this would have happened. But then we wouldn't have learned what we learned, I pointed out. Sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what's really important. She nodded thoughtfully. I'm putting that in the next HOA newsletter. By autumn, when the air started to cool again and the threat of winter loomed on the horizon, our neighborhood was a different place. Not physically, the houses looked the same, the streets followed the same paths, but the atmosphere had changed. People talked to each other more. They offered help before being asked. They actually looked forward to HOA meetings because they were collaborative and productive instead of hostile. And when the first cold snap of the season hit in November, I noticed extension cords running from garages to cars all up and down the street. Nobody said a word. Susan drove past my house one morning, saw mine plugged in, and gave me a cheerful wave. Some rules, we'd learned, were meant to be flexible. I often thought about that night in the blizzard, all of us crammed into my living room with buckets of tropical fish and a roaring fire. It had been chaotic and exhausting and more than a little absurd. But it had also been the moment when a collection of houses became a real community. Dorothy passed away peacefully in her sleep the following January. Susan was devastated, but the neighborhood rallied around her in ways I don't think she expected. Deborah organized a memorial service in the community center. Marcus handled the technical aspects of live streaming it for distant relatives. I helped with the reception afterward, making sure Susan ate something and had people to talk to. Mom would have loved this, Susan told me at the reception. She always said that the measure of a life well lived was the community you built around yourself. I never really understood what she meant until this past year. She raised a good daughter, I said, even if that daughter was a bit rule-obsessed for a while. Susan laughed through her tears. I prefer to think of it as growth. I was rule-obsessed. Now I'm people-focused. It's an improvement. At Dorothy's memorial, person after person stood up to tell stories about her kindness, her wisdom, her ability to make anyone feel welcome. But the story that got the biggest laugh was when Deborah told everyone about the night we rescued tropical fish during a blizzard. And Dorothy had monitored water temperatures with a meat thermometer while keeping everyone's spirits up. She told me that night that people were more important than rules, Deborah said, wiping her eyes. That sometimes you had to do the illogical thing because it was the right thing. I'll never forget that. After the service, as I was helping clean up, I found Susan standing alone in the corner, looking at photos of her mother on a memorial display. "You okay?" I asked. "I keep thinking about that extension cord," she said. "If I hadn't been so rigid about it, if I had just let you keep it plugged in, maybe Deborah wouldn't have been so desperate. Maybe she wouldn't have been running that space heater constantly. Maybe none of this would have happened. And maybe we'd all still be strangers living on the same street," I countered. "Maybe your mom wouldn't have spent her last year being part of this community, making friends, telling stories. You can't know how things would have turned out differently. You can only know what actually happened." And what happened? What happened is we all became better neighbors, better people. That's worth an exploded transformer and some stolen extension cords, don't you think? She smiled. When you put it that way, life in Maplewood Heights continued its steady rhythm. Seasons changed, people moved in and out, but the sense of community we'd built during that blizzard remained. New residents were welcomed with genuine warmth and quickly integrated into the neighborhood's social fabric. The HOA, under Susan's continued leadership, became known throughout Boulder as a model for how such organizations should operate. I never forgot that night during the blizzard, and neither did anyone else who was there. It became part of neighborhood lore, the story that got told at parties and barbecues, usually with increasing embellishment. "I heard there were 50 fish," someone would say. "It was 23, I'd correct, and Gerald carried them all through the blizzard by himself. There were 4 of us, and we made multiple trips. But the truth was better than any embellishment. The truth was that a stolen extension cord and a blown transformer had brought a community together. That tropical fish had survived a blizzard because neighbors cared more about each other than about rules. That sometimes the right thing to do was also the illogical thing. And the truth was that Susan Kensington, former HOA tyrant, had become one of my closest friends, all because she'd been willing to admit she was wrong and change. Years later, when I think about that winter, I remember the cold, the snow, the long night without power. But mostly I remember warmth, the warmth of the fireplace, the warmth of community, the warmth of people choosing kindness over rules. Herbert the eel lived for another 5 years, and when he finally passed away, the neighborhood held a small memorial service. Only in Maplewood Heights would people mourn a fish, but that was who we'd become. A place where everyone mattered, even the tropical fish. Deborah eventually started a small business teaching people about aquarium care and proper fish keeping. She credited that blizzard night with giving her the confidence to pursue it. "If my fish could survive being carried through a blizzard in buckets, I figured I could survive anything," she told me. Marcus and Jennifer had a baby girl, and guess what they named her? Dorothy, after Susan's mother. Susan cried when they told her. As for me, I still live in Maplewood Heights, still deal with the occasional HOA issue, and still have my extension cord ready for winter. It's coiled up in my garage most of the year, but when the temperature drops and the snow starts falling, I plug in my block heater without hesitation. And every time I do, I think about Susan standing on my porch that frigid February morning, clipboard in hand, telling me that rules were rules. I think about Deborah, so desperate to save her fish that she broke into my garage. I think about all of us hauling buckets through a blizzard because it was the right thing to do. The extension cord that caused all the trouble still works perfectly. I've offered it back to Deborah several times, but she insists I keep it. It's a reminder, she says, that sometimes breaking the rules and admitting you need help is the bravest thing you can do. So it stays in my garage, right next to its replacement, both of them ready for whatever crisis might come next. Because in Maplewood Heights, we'd learned that you prepare for emergencies not just with supplies and equipment, but with community and trust. The blizzard that took out our power and tested our neighborhood was just weather in the end. It came, it wreaked havoc, and it passed. But what it revealed about us, about who we could be when we chose people over rules and compassion over rigidity, that stayed forever. And all because Susan Kensington stole my extension cord in a blizzard, and her space heater tripped the whole block. Best worst thing that ever happened to our neighborhood.